questions on a statement made in the House of Commons on Wednesday the 4th of June on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories.
My Lords, the events that we are seeing in Gaza and that we've witnessed in recent weeks is truly harrowing. It is evident that dramatic change is needed from the current situation, and the level of suffering ongoing in the region on all sides is intolerable. We are clear that the deaths and casualties near aid distribution centres should never have happened, and I note that public threats were issued by Hamas towards any civilians trying to access those aid points. So will the Noble Lord the Minister inform the House what discussions have taken place with Israel about those events and the status of any investigations? I'm sure the whole House is agreed that the Government should do all it can to try and alleviate this humanitarian crisis which is escalating in the region. Britain must leverage its influence to get more aid in, see the hostages released, and to end the terminal situation with Hamas to achieve a proper, sustainable end to the conflict. It is only after this work has been done that we can begin to progress towards a better, long-term future for the Palestinian and Israeli people. My Lords, we must never forget those who remain in Hamas captivity. Some 58 hostages remain in the hands of this murderous terrorist organisation. They have now been in captivity for well over 600 days. We have always been clear that they must be released. We are aware of initiatives put forward by the United States, and these latest proposals have been rejected by Hamas. So I want to ask the Noble Lord the Minister what pressure are the government exerting on Hamas, perhaps working through sympathetic Arab governments, to get them to reverse their opposition to those plans, and what steps does the government intend to make next to secure the release of those hostages, which I am sure the Minister is well aware of is the only true way that we will ever resolve this conflict. Turning to the West Bank, the Government recently signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Palestinian Authority. Can the Noble Lord the Minister please provide an update on the Authority's progress on reform and governance since that time? Strengthening credible governance will be essential to long-term peace, and we need assurance from the Government that they are confident that these vital steps are being taken. It is, after all, essential if we are ever to ensure that Hamas do not maintain a grip over the region, that the Palestinian Authority is strengthened and reformed, and that is also the only way that we will ever reach a viable two-state solution. My Lords, can I take a moment to speak about last week's Gaza demonstration outside this House? Of course, I'm proud that this is a free country. Everyone is entitled to protest and to make their point. However, there were numerous reports of peers from all sides of this House being jostled, harassed, videoed and shouted at, including disabled members of this House. And a letter has been sent to the Lord Speaker regarding some of the security failings. My Lords, that demonstration was attended and supported by about a dozen Labour members of the other place. And I'd be interested in the Minister's comments on whether he considers that sort of behaviour acceptable. My Lords, the gravity of the situation escalating in Gaza means the Government must leverage all the influence that they have in the region to try and end the suffering that we are seeing. The UK has both the diplomatic tools and moral responsibility to press for meaningful change. That means doing all that it can to ensure aid reaches those that need, that hostages are returned to their families, and that Hamas is prevented from continuing its campaign of terror. It also means supporting the reform and stabilisation of Palestinian governance as an essential foundation for a viable two-state solution. I hope the Noble Lord will be able to respond to these points in his reply.
My Lords, we are witnessing both the systematic collective punishment and brutalisation of the civilian population, combined with the weaponisation of food and medicine. And the Government has made a decision to annex land which is not theirs, and to put in a position where women and children, whose only sin is seeking aid, will now literally be at risk of starving to death. These are war crimes. Civilians are dying daily from gunshot wounds inflicted as they queue for food. And yesterday, the head of Save the Children US said it is reported that for children who require surgery, they are waking up during surgery because there is insufficient anaesthetic. In all of the catalogue of horror in recent days, we know three incontrovertible facts. First, Prime Minister Netanyahu's approach has not ended Hamas' continued criminal and terrorist presence, and the trauma of hostage families continues, and now with too many it has turned into despair. Second, we see unabated the approach of extremist ministers to forcibly and illegally occupy new territory. And third, the sincerely meant and genuine concern of ministers in the UK and elsewhere is having next to no effect in preventing it. The time for timid behaviour, therefore, is over. These benches have consistently called for the government to take firmer action, and they must do so now. We called for the sanctioning of extremist ministers Ben Gvir and Smotrich 18 months ago because we knew we needed clear preventative action. Given the legal text of what we called for is on ministers' desks, why is the government not implementing those sanctions, demonstrating that the UK will no longer tolerate calls for Palestinian depossession? We must cease all trade in the areas affected by these because Netanyahu's ministers claim illegal outposts and settlements are Israeli land, which they are not. Why has the UK not expanded action to those ministers and members of the Knesset who support a continuation of the blockade of aid and call for annexation? And why has the UK not ceased all arms trading with the Netanyahu government until they adhere to international humanitarian law? The Minister in the House of Commons was asked last week of our government's view of the ICJ advisory opinion on the Netanyahu government that, I quote, policies and practices are contrary to the prohibition of forcible transfer of the protected population under Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention. He replied, and I quote from Hansard, "We continue to consider the ICJ's advisory opinion with the seriousness that it deserves." I remind the House the opinion was in July last year, and surely the government cannot any longer simply consider it, but should act on the opinion. When ministers tell me the government acts on the advisory opinion of the ICJ and the Chagos Islands, but not on Gaza, I say to the government, we must not have double standards. As I said at the start of the questions to the Minister, we are a witness to history, one where we look with daily horror at the continuing unconscionable cruelty to children. But we are a Parliament and not just a witness. We must now, with urgency and clarity, provide action, which is not too late to seek to prevent the annexation of Gaza and the West Bank, with the UK leading others in recognising the state of Palestine, showing beyond doubt the UK's commitment to Palestinians' right to self-determination and a two-state solution. With this and the other actions these benches have outlined, might we at least try and restore a process which a ceasefire could start and established and be honoured, and there can be some respite for those being so terribly brutalised.
Well, I thank both noble lords for their contributions and their questions. Can I say to the noble lord opposite that the United Kingdom has been a close and long-standing friend of Israel. As the Foreign Secretary said yesterday, Israel suffered a heinous attack on October the 7th. The government has always backed Israel's right to defend itself. We have condemned Hamas and its abhorrent treatment of the hostages, and we have stood with the families and demanded that their loved ones are released. However, we also have a duty to condemn Israel's latest action in Gaza. As the Foreign Secretary has said, the Israeli government is isolating Israel from its friends and partners around the world, undermining the interests of the Israeli people and damaging the state of Israel. Can I just say that we have been very clear in terms of condemning the comments of a number of the governments, in fact Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and we've been very clear in terms of condemning that outrageous language. But as the noble lord knows, I will not be tempted into foreseeing or predicting future sanctions. We do not do that, and I'm not going to do that today. We have been absolutely clear. We won't speculate, but we have made it clear in our joint statement with France and Canada that if Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions. We've been very strong with our partners in opposing the expansion of Israel's military operation in Gaza, and we have reaffirmed our calls for Israeli government to stop its military operations in Gaza and immediately allow humanitarian aid into. On the 20th of May, the Foreign Secretary did announce those sanctions to target those supporting violence against Palestinian communities in the West Bank, following extremely concerning surges in this type of violence. We've announced the formal pause of free trade agreement negotiations with Israel, effective immediately. This is because it is not possible to advance discussions on deepening trading relationships with the Netanyahu government that is pursuing policies which are damaging to the UK, the wider region, and its own citizens. The Minister for the Middle East also summoned the Israeli ambassador to discuss our severe concerns at the situation. And we are clear that if Israel doesn't cease the renewed military offensive and lift restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in response. And of course, the Noble Lord Purvis also raised the ICJ, and can I just say we are fully committed to international law and respect the independence of the ICJ. We continue, despite what the Noble Lord says, we continue to consider the Court's advisory opinion carefully with the seriousness and rigour it deserves. UK commitment to a state solution is, of course, unwavering, and I'll come back to that point. But can I just say to both Noble Lords, and I know they share my concern, we are absolutely appalled by repeated reports of massive casualty incidents in which Palestinians have been killed when trying to access aid sites in Gaza. Desperate civilians who've endured 20 months of war should never face the risk of death or injury simply to feed themselves and their families. We have called for an immediate and independent investigation into these events and for the perpetrators to be held to account, including during a meeting of the UN Security Council on the 4th of June. We do not support any aid mechanism that seeks to deliver political or military objectives or puts vulnerable civilians at risk. We call on Israel to urgently engage with the UN to ensure a return to delivery of aid in line with humanitarian principles. Israel's proposals to deliver aid to Gaza via private companies is dangerous for civilians and aid workers and cannot possibly deliver aid to all who need it. And we endorse the plan for delivery of aid put forward by the UN on the 16th of May, which is based on humanitarian principles, has built-in mitigations against aid diversion and uses established mechanisms to deliver aid at scale, which is required. Hamas must allow humanitarian assistance to be distributed without interference. I think all Noble Lords understand and appreciate the seriousness of the situation, and certainly we are very focused on trying to see what leverage we can, working with our allies, to ensure that a solution is found as soon as possible. In terms of the demonstration, I think the Noble Lord is absolutely right. We can be proud of our country that does allow the right to association and the freedom to demonstrate. And I think all of us in this House also respect opinions that don't necessarily agree with our own, particularly on this subject. But I do accept that it is wrong for people to interfere with others who are going about their business, and certainly I would join him in condemning such action. It's not acceptable at all.
My Lords, the statement makes reference to the importance of a two-state solution if we're to get security for both Palestinians and Israelis. In the light of that, could the Minister say what action, and it means more than condemnation, it really does mean action, the government is taking, given the decision by the Israeli government to build 22 new settlements on the West Bank, settlements which are illegal and which will make it more and more difficult to have a two-state solution. If you could give the House some hope that we are going to take action that goes beyond simply condemnation on this matter, I'd be grateful.
Well, I hear what my noble friend says, but, you know, since we came to office, this government has taken action. And, of course, we stopped the export of arms that could be used in Gaza. And we are determined to take further action, particularly with the discussions on the free trade agreement. So this is a government that has taken action. But it isn't just about punitive action. This is about working with allies to achieve that goal of a two-state solution. And that's why we are very committed to ensuring that the conference that is co-hosted by France and Saudi Arabia is a success. Because if we can focus all international allies, including those in the Middle East, on the importance of delivering a two-state solution, then I think it won't just be punitive action that this government will be taking, but it's that positive action towards a peaceful solution. And the only, I would say to my noble friend opposite, the only real secure future, both for Palestinians and for Israel, is a two-state solution where both communities can live in peace.
My Lords, if there is to be a recognition of a Palestinian state, would the Minister tell us what the boundaries are going to be of that state? And will he give an assurance that any recognition would ensure that all parties recognise the right of the Jewish people to have a state?
Well, I think the noble Lord knows the answer, because those that have advocated a two-state solution and support parties towards it, obviously a precondition is the security of the State of Israel. We're absolutely committed to that. And I think the progress towards a two-state solution, we've been working with the Palestinian Authority that does recognise that. And we've had progress in the past. But we want to ensure that we support those in the Palestinian Authority that can deliver that two-state solution that the noble Lord referred to. So I don't disagree with him. I just think that he implies, and I would strongly say, we see recognition as part of the process towards the establishment of a two-state solution. We don't see it as the end in itself. When the time is right to do that, it will be when we can deliver a more secure basis for that solution.
My Lords, the situation in Gaza is horrendous and any new settlement building is completely wrong. But can I just press for a greater understanding of the government's position on aid delivery? I follow the logic of what the noble Lord the Minister says, that aid should not be delivered to further any political or military objective. But then what does the government think of the way that aid has got in until now? When the noble Lord the Minister sees masked Hamas gunmen on top of aid trucks and sees the Hamas operatives threatening death to anyone who takes aid which is not through that route, surely the government does understand that that route is also fundamentally compromised.
Well, the only word I disagree with, my noble friend, is the word fundamental, because we have been working with all the UN agencies and other NGOs to ensure that Hamas doesn't interfere with distribution. We've made that absolutely clear, and such interference is something we have strongly condemned. But the simple fact is that we know that the delivery of aid via private companies is dangerous for civilians and aid workers and can't possibly deliver aid to all who need it. And that's why we continue to press the government of Israel to permit the full and unhindered resumption of aid flow into Gaza, and that should take place immediately. By far the most effective way to meet the desperate needs of the Gazan people at the speed and scale that is needed is via overland routes, and that is through the UN agencies and other NGOs that we have supported to deliver that aid.
My Lords, for as long as most of us can remember, ministers like my noble friend have been talking about the two-state solution as being the holy grail that gets us all out of the difficulties. But isn't it time now that we recognised the simple truth, which I'd ask him to confirm, that the present government in Israel, and indeed almost any reconfiguration of it that we could imagine, is implacably opposed in principle to any suggestion of a Palestinian state, and indeed, as Lord Pickles helpfully reminded us, there isn't a boundary that could be seen to provide one at the moment. Now, what we need to be doing is to try and unlock that hopeless position of the Israelis vetoing any independence whatsoever to the people of the West Bank or East Jerusalem, and take the opportunity of the Saudi Arabia and French initiative and make some movement towards breaking the logjam by saying that, yes, we will. The UK government, with allies, will recognise a Palestinian state, because until everyone, including the Israelis, recognise the imperative requirement for that, there will be no peace.
Well, if only it was a question of the United Kingdom recognising the Palestinian state. And of course, our long-standing position, as my noble friend knows, is that we will do so. We will recognise a Palestinian state at a time that is most conducive to the peace process and to the realisation of a Palestinian state. It's one thing to say, yes, we'll recognise. It's another thing to see a secure situation established where the Palestinian people can live securely in a neighbourly way with the state of Israel, as the noble Lord Pickles says. So when we recognise, it will be when it is conducive to delivering that objective. And I understand, I mean, everyone in this chamber has had its hopes raised for peace in the Middle East, certainly since 1948. And I think we have got to be absolutely more renewed in our efforts to deliver that, because the humanitarian situation, those extremists in the Israeli government have shown what they can do, and the situation in Gaza is absolutely evidence of that, and we must not tolerate it.
My Lords, I draw attention to my entry on the Register of Interest, and hearing and listening very carefully to my noble friend Lord Pickles. I would say there are plans, there are people in Israel, there are people within the Palestinian Authority, there are people amongst all communities who want peace, and peace now. We all agree as one, irrespective of the need to get aid in. I've said to the Minister before, use the air routes, unblock them, work with the United States, Egypt and Jordan and get aid delivered, and work with all sides to ensure that aid gets in. But my question is quite a specific one. There is a peace plan from a former Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Olmert, and a former Foreign Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Nasser al-Kidwa. It works on the two-state solution, including on the definition of boundaries, but importantly recognise the sacred nature of East Jerusalem, and indeed as a place which is sacred to the Jewish community, the Muslim community and the Christian community. There are plans and people who are wishing to engage. Will the Minister assure me that he will ensure that His Majesty's government will engage with all these key parties, because ultimately peace, as Menachem Begin said, is inevitable?
Well, I think the noble Lord is absolutely right in terms of the people of Israel, and I'm very careful to draw a clear distinction between the people of Israel and the current government of Israel. It is the current government of Israel that is pursuing this awful policy in relation to Gaza. But I think the Noble Lord is absolutely right to draw attention to a range of options in terms of the peace discussions. That's why I think the initiative by France and Saudi Arabia is really important, because it can convene people, and we talked about before in the earlier question about the convening power of the United Nations, which is absolutely vital. I don't think we can take an exclusive approach to the peace process. It has to be as inclusive as possible. But one thing we are determined to do is to support the reforms within the Palestinian Authority, to strengthen its work and strengthen its credibility amongst the Palestinian people, and we're determined to do that. Can I just say, in relation to his question on aid, he knows if we could have airlifts into it, or that we would explore every mechanism to get aid in. But as he was repeatedly reassured me when I was in opposition and he was the minister, there is only one real successful way to get the amount of aid that is needed into Gaza, and that's through the road routes, and we're determined to ensure that is the case.
My Lord, we have plenty of time. The Bishop first and then Lib Dem.
I'm grateful to the Noble Lord the Minister and to His Majesty's Government for the statement on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. May I press the Noble Lord the Minister on two things. Firstly, the attack by Israeli forces on the compound of the Anglican Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza, killing 5, including 3 journalists and a father escorting his son to the surgical unit for treatment from prior injuries. This is the latest in a number of attacks by the IDF on church hospitals and churches in defiance of international law. Will the Minister accept that specific actions are now required, since reason pleas have been ignored? And secondly, in the light of what the Minister has said about the UN conference from the 17th to 20th of June, and talking about the conducive time to recognise Palestine, will he confirm that a very bold and clear statement will be made at that conference of the firm intention of the government to recognise the state of Palestine?
Well, I would say to the Right Reverend Prelate that I have been clear in relation to when we will recognise the state of Palestine, and that is when it's most conducive to that two-state solution. And we will work with allies to ensure that we can create those conditions. And I think the conference is part of that, but it isn't the sole part of it. But I also think he's absolutely right in condemning some of the actions in Gaza and in the occupied territories in terms of the use of violence. And I think we can all be very concerned. And I would point out that, it is frustrating to sort of appear to sort of think that we're not doing anything. We are absolutely determined to work with our allies so that the government of Israel understands fully our concerns. And of course, we voted on June the 4th in favour of the resolution in the UN Security Council, which was focused on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And we highlighted that the Israeli government's decisions to expand its military operations in Gaza and severely restrict aid are totally unjustifiable, disproportionate and counterproductive. And we've, with our allies, called for its end to restrictions on aid. We believe that UN and other humanitarian partners must be allowed to operate, and we must be able to get back to the situation where we can get aid where it is most needed. And of course, on the 19th of May, we released a joint statement with Canada and France calling for Israel to cease its renewed military offensive and lift restrictions. So we are using what mechanisms we can. We are also using specific actions bilaterally against the government of Israel. And of course, the initial one was the restrictions of arms sales, but also on the trade agreement. We are absolutely committed to ensuring that we work with our allies to ensure that the government of Israel knows our deep concern on this situation.
It's the Lib Dem and then...
My Lords.
Lib Dem.
Go on, Bob.
Thank you. My Lord, what is the government's response to reports claiming that thousands of items listed under the category bombs, grenades, torpedoes, mines, missiles and similar munitions of war were exported from the UK to Israel, as well as 4 shipments described under customs codes as tanks and other armoured fighting vehicles, all reportedly delivered after the government suspended licence for equipment that could be used offensively in Gaza in September? Will the government take firm action to ensure that weapons from the UK are not being used to commit war crimes in Gaza and the West Bank and occupied territories?
Can I absolutely reassure the noble lady that the UK is not arming Israel's war in Gaza? We can categorically, we do not export any bombs or ammunition for use in military operations in Gaza. And certainly, as I've repeatedly said, one of the first acts of this government was to review and suspend export licences that could be used by the Israeli Defence Forces in Gaza. And we have successfully implemented that suspension and continue to review all relevant licence applications. And I've also seen press reports. We do not recognise the suggestion that arms exports from the UK to Israel increased following the 7th of October 2023, which covers a period under the last government. The government took a decisive action upon taking action, initiating a review of international humanitarian law on that day. So I can categorically say that we are not exporting bombs or ammunition for use in military operations.
Every day in the prayers in this House, we pledge to put aside personal interests, prejudices and partial affections, that is, so-called friendships. And yet we look in a benevolent way to the Israeli government accused of genocide, war crimes, and the weaponizing of hunger against Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. And unbelievably, yes, continue to supply arms and intelligence to Israel. Would the noble Lord, the Minister, agree that in the 21st century it's imperative that we look beyond political or friendships or economic gain and base our foreign policy on the Christian and Sikh teaching of looking to the wider well-being of all, including Palestinians?
Well, I think I gave, in response to an earlier question, an absolutely categorical assurance that we are not arming Israel with bombs and ammunition that could be used in Gaza. I'd categorically say that. But can I just say that, I think we are faced with a situation here. Israel has the right to defend itself. What the government of Israel doesn't have the right to do is to deny humanitarian aid into Gaza. And we've made that position absolutely clear. And of course, we are absolutely focused on ensuring that that aid gets in. I think, as we've debated on many times, the real solution comes when we can create the situation which I believe the majority of Israeli citizens want. They want peace. They want to live with their neighbour, and they want a secure state. But so does the Palestinians. And that two-state solution is something that we should be absolutely aimed towards. That is the condition for peace, living side by side with neighbours in a peaceful way.
My Lords. My Lords.
This side.
My Lords, I draw attention to my entry on the Register of Interests. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is desperate, with many thousands of civilians needing food and medical supplies. access to aid must be safe and rapidly expanded. And I was in Israel discussing these issues with opposition leaders the week before last. They are clear that this war must stop and that the hostages need to come home as a top priority. An election will take place in Israel next year, and every poll since October the 7th points to Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition being ejected from office. What steps is this government taking to strengthen those Israelis and Palestinians serious about the compromises necessary for progress towards peace and the two-state solution that we all want to see?
Of course, the government of Israel is a matter for the people of Israel, and it's for them to decide. But I'm confident that the majority of people in Israel do want peace and do want the things that my noble friend has said. But I think what the most important thing this government can do is to work with our allies, particularly in the Middle East, to ensure that the agenda for the conference on the two-state solution is absolutely focused on the means to deliver it and to ensure that we can create those conditions my noble friend has said.
My Lords, as the